Welcome to The Grasp. I'm Doug. Last time we talked about money and how it is economic energy. This time we're going to talk about the problem, which is of course inflation. So buckle up and let's get to it. We can think of money as economic energy that powers the ability to trade or transact. So what is the problem with money? And of course, as we have said, it's inflation. And so what exactly is inflation? So in history, every single monetary system has the same flaw. Let's think of the Romans. So in ancient Rome, they minted copper, silver, gold coins, and every coin had a certain amount of silver or gold in it. The temptation is to debase the currency. And why is that? Well, Romans have expensive wars, expensive building projects. All of those things take money. And so they begin to cut the amount of gold or silver in a coin. And they keep on cutting it and cutting it and cutting it, and it gets to a point to where no one will accept the coin because it doesn't have enough of the valuable material in the coin to make it worthwhile. You've heard the saying, your money's no good here. That literally comes from history. Think about this, it's very difficult to manage a war or to keep a war going on when your mercenaries won't accept the coin that you offer to pay them because it has no value in it. Same thing with building projects or any other type of expensive venture that governments get into. So these are all examples out of history. But the problem is this same song gets played over again and again and again throughout the eons by every different government and every different ruler, because every different monarchy or government falls into the same temptation. They begin to debase the currency, which makes the currency collapse. And when the currency collapses, the society or empire collapse.
I've got it.
Modern currency systems are all based on paper. If I expand the money supply and devalue the currency, eventually the currency collapses. We see this play out time and time again, even in the modern world, with Argentina, Zimbabwe, Lebanon. All of those things, all of those countries have had their currency collapse because of the expansion of the money supply. So the issue across history always comes down to the same thing: trust in the issuer. You are trusting a person or a family like the Rothschilds, or a government or a king.
Gentlemen, you're on your own.
But that trust only goes so far. This very week, the New York Democrat, Mike Bloomberg, said, because of the inflation issue here in the United States, that you should just spend your money or your paycheck very quickly to deal with the inflation problem.
What?
That's not a very good solution.
Freaking idiot.
Now, in the modern era, economists like Malden and Amos, who wrote the Bitcoin standard, estimate that the dollar-weighted average of inflation over the last decade or so has been about 14%. It turns out that that's about equal to the S&P 500. Now, the S&P 500, for those who don't know, is a collection of 500 stocks that generally represent the stock market. So what they're saying is that the stock market has basically kept pace with inflation over the last decade or so. It boils down to, what is inflation really? Your average man on the street probably doesn't understand it all that much. According to the US government, inflation is the CPI, and that stands for Consumer Price Index. It's a basket of consumer good products that the government keeps track of their prices to determine inflation. So here's the trick. The government gets to pick what things they put in the basket to track.
It's computers.
They exclude food and they exclude energy and gasoline. So if I'm the government, I'm picking things to track that doesn't have a lot of inflation in them. For instance, Domino's Pizza or streaming videos, not a whole lot of inflation involved in those. And it's just those sorts of things that the government chooses to track for inflation. And that's why, according to the government, over the last decade or so, inflation's averaged about 2%.
Well, you know what reports are. Depends on who's writing them.
However, the Case-Shiller Index, which tracks housing costs in the United States, is up 27% year over year. Housing in Canada is up over 15% year over year. The S&P is up over 30% year over year. So what is the real inflation rate?
Hey, Dave, listen up, please.
Look, the inflation rate is a vector. If you want to be wealthy, you have to buy scarce and desirable assets. So what matters is the rate at which stocks are inflating, or property, or real estate, or companies. And I can tell you that that is a high inflation rate. Now, if I just want to be a consumer and live in my parents' basement the rest of my life and eat Domino's pizza and watch Netflix and stream videos on YouTube, well then the CPI probably is about the inflation rate I can expect. But if you don't want that, if you would like to have a house and a car and a family and have your kids go to college, then the CPI is not the inflation rate. Look, as a practical matter, for anyone wanting something other than living in your parents' basement the rest of your life, the inflation rate that matters is the monetary inflation rate. And that is the rate at which the money supply is increasing.
Waiter.
Sir?
Can I?
Of course.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much. What?
So the monetary expansion rate has been about 10% a year over the decades leading up to COVID. And as we have said before, that's keeping pace with the S&P. But since COVID, the money supply has been expanding closer to 30% per year.
Whoa.
And last year the S&P did about 34%, which is again keeping pace with the monetary inflation rate. But what has happened all over the world is the US Federal Reserve, the EU Central Bank, and other central banks around the globe have been printing money like crazy. They have stepped on the accelerator of those money printing machines, and they are printing it like it is going out of style. Here in the West, we're seeing the money supply increase by 20, 25, 30% every single year. As a result, currencies all over the globe are collapsing. They're devaluing, they are losing their buying power. In weaker countries, it's much worse. The official inflation rate of Venezuela is stated to be 45%. The actual inflation rate of Venezuela is closer to 90%. Same thing in Zimbabwe and Lebanon. So what we see happening all over the world is currency collapse, which we call inflation. What we're being told here in the US is that inflation is the CPI, excluding food and energy. But in what universe can you live without food and energy? Look, it's just common sense. If the government's telling me that inflation's 2 to 5%, but housing's up 30%, stocks are up 30%, talk to anyone that manufactures anything, they'll tell you their supply costs are up 30%. How is anyone supposed to buy anything? Your average Joe has a job and he's earning a wage or a salary. Did your salary go up 30% every year? Did your wage or your hourly rate go up 30% every year? How is anyone supposed to buy something?
Quit squawking, fleshwad. Nobody's forcing you to buy anything.
To use CPI to gauge inflation is like trying to use simple arithmetic to gauge the complexity of the entire economy. It can't be done. Look, an economy is a complicated thing. It's like fluid dynamics or aerodynamics. You can't do that using simple addition and subtraction arithmetic. It's vector calculus. And that's obvious to anybody who just gives it a little bit of thought. Because you know as well as I do, look, the price of a home in the Hamptons is different than the price of a home in Billings, Montana, which is different than a price of a home in Nashville, Tennessee. Even in the same city, the price of a home in one part of Nashville is going to be moving at a different rate than another part of Nashville. That's just life and the way it is. And so it is a complicated thing to try and model an economic model, and the CPI doesn't do it. So clearly, inflation is a real problem, and it's a phenomenon whereby the government just prints more and more and more money.
Philly, are you a donkey?
The question remains then, why do they do it? Well, if you have $1 trillion obligation, then it's a lot easier to just print $1 trillion than it is to try and extract $1 trillion from your population via taxes.
Government do take a bite, don't you?
And so governments always try to take the easy way out. I'll just print more money. Throughout the entire history of the world, from ancient times through the Romans, through the Middle Ages to the current day, every single coinage and monetary system has collapsed because of inflation. We can go all the way back to Sumer, the Persian states, the Middle East, Renaissance Italy, Greek states, the Roman states, the kings of England and France and Spain. Every one of these monarchs, every one of these civilizations had coins where they started out with a certain amount of gold or silver in it, and they cut 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 it. Even here in the United States, if you're young, you may not know this. Do you know that our quarters used to be silver? That's part of the big silver boom that happened in Tombstone, Arizona. They had silver mines there, and they were pulling out and extracting all this silver, which was going to make U.S. quarters. But the U.S. quarters aren't silver anymore. Why?
I don't know. You don't? Not a clue.
The reason U.S. quarters aren't silver anymore is because we have debased and debased and debased the currency so that the value of the silver is worth more than a quarter. So we had to take the silver out of the coin to represent the actual value of a quarter.
No way! Yes way!
Inflation is caused by increasing the money supply. Inflation collapses the currency, then the currency collapsing collapses the society. It's happened time and time and time again throughout history. So the question remains, why do governments fall for it? Why do they drink the poison? The most common reason? Wars. Countries get involved in wars they can't afford to fight. During World War I, that first week of World War I, all of the countries got off the gold standard. The United States, Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy, they all decoupled from the gold standard and started printing money. And you can do that for about 4 years. And after 4 years, Germany had exhausted all of the money. Inflation was rampant, and so they sued for peace. The same thing happened again in World War II, about 4 years. The same thing happened in Vietnam. Vietnam, we were printing more and more money, and in 1971, Nixon had to remove us permanently from the gold standard, and we've been a fiat currency ever since. And the reason governments are able to do this is because they have a monopoly on the coinage or the monetary system. Look, most economists subscribe to modern money theory, which basically says, look, if you're the world's reserve currency, you can print as much money as you want, it doesn't matter. But common sense tells you if you just keep printing money, you're not creating anything else in the economy. You are not creating more stuff. All you're doing is make the stuff cost more. Let's think of it this way. There are about 300 million people in the United States. So let's say that I can snap my fingers and instantly $1 billion goes into everybody's bank account. So you're looking at your statement and all of a sudden you have $1 billion in there. And everyone decides to go out and buy a Ferrari. Are there 300 million Ferraris out there for somebody to go buy now, even though everybody has $1 billion? So we haven't created anything more in the economy. We've just increased the amount of money. So now the price of a Ferrari is going to go up dramatically because anybody who wants one is going to have to pay up to get it.
But
Look, it's easy to print money. I can print all the money that we want to print. They did that in Zimbabwe. Did you know Zimbabwe actually has $1 trillion bill? So printing money isn't the issue. All you're doing is creating paper. Inflation only works if you can export it. So if you aren't actually creating anything in the economy, all you're doing is redistributing wealth. Let me explain what I mean. So if there's $10 billion worth of stuff in the economy, and I print another $1 billion and I give it to my friend, I've literally just given him 10% of the economy. So as the government expands the money supply, all they're doing is taking wealth away from people who have savings, right? If you have your money in cash, if you have it sitting in a bank, or if you have it in some type of a cash-based derivative, all we are doing is sucking the value out of those assets. Let's just think about it in practical terms. Let's say you have $1 million in your bank account. If you want to go out and buy scarce and valuable assets like stocks, you're going to have to pay 30% more to buy stocks. If you want to go out and buy a house in the Hamptons, you're going to spend 40% more than you did last year. Your $1 million is static. It's the same amount of money. But what you want to go and purchase with that $1 million is continuing to increase in price. The truth is that the wealthy really don't have a lot of exposure to cash. They're not sitting there with a ton of money sitting in the bank. They're buying property. They're buying businesses. They're buying collectibles. They're buying assets and sporting teams, right? The people that are exposed are the middle class and the working class because they work for a job for cash. If they have any money, it's sitting in the bank in cash. But the chances are they may not even have that much cash. But regardless, they're the ones that are exposed. But the real significance is if the dollar is losing 20% of its value each year, you are losing 20% buying power with your salary each year. It's not falling 2 or 5% like the government says that it is. This is the true road to serfdom, working harder and harder and harder for something when your cash and your salary is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. My son likes analogies, so how about another analogy? Let's say that the currency is to the economy what blood is to your body. And the energy or money of the currency is the same as oxygen is to the blood. So if I start sucking the oxygen out of a room, eventually you are going to suffocate and die. And if you suck the energy or the monetary power out of the currency, eventually the economy collapses and dies. In the extreme of that situation, when the currency collapses, you don't use currency anymore. We end up in a Stone Age bartering type system to where I'll trade you corn for wheat and you trade me tobacco for bullets. The problem is that that is 1,000,000 times less efficient. So how many countries have had their currency collapse? Well, currently there are about 180 or so countries in the world. 66 of those are dollarized, meaning they base their economies on the US dollar. About 130 have floating currencies. All of those are weaker than the US dollar because the US dollar is currently the world reserve standard. But the dollar is weakening. As per our analogy, the oxygen is getting sucked out of the room. So if I tell you that the oxygen is getting sucked out of the room and an oxygen mask dropped down, what are you going to do? Of course, the obvious answer is I'm going to grab the oxygen mask and put it on. Cryptocurrency is the oxygen mask. So to recap, we've covered what money is. We've covered what the problem is, inflation. Cryptocurrency is the solution, and we'll cover that in our next video. We'll see you back here on The Grasp.